Hello and welcome to episode 210 of Stand Up. Joining me today again, author and historian Kenneth C Davis and over 50 listeners, subscribers, and friends of mine. I'm Pete Dominic. Time to stand up with me right now. Yeah, welcome to the show. Very excited to have you. And last night, I welcomed over 50 listeners and subscribers and friends to join me to ask Kenneth C. Davis questions about his new book, which I've now interviewed him in 3 times for Strongman, The Rise of Five Dictators and the Fall of Democracy. We had a great time hanging out last night. I hope that you, what just happened? That you will join us for the next Zoom Hangout and the next guested Zoom Hangout, where I'll invite a guest, in this case, the book club. Strongman, the author, Kenneth C. Davis, joined us. We had a great time talking last night, and I'm going to share all of that with you in just a couple of minutes here, but I wanted to play a couple things for you and talk just for a few minutes here at the top, because a lot happened yesterday, as it does seemingly every day. Ice Cube messed up, apparently, and alienated the black community. 15 million people have already voted. There are 8 states now that we are looking at as identified as swing states or battleground states or whatever you want to call them. And also you had day 3 of Amy Coney Barrett's testimony for her confirmation hearings. And the big news that NBC announced they would have a Trump town hall opposite the Joe Biden town hall. And that outraged a lot of people, and we talked about that. But just in case you don't know, Trump said he wasn't going to participate in a virtual debate after he came down with COVID. And then the Biden team and Joe Biden said, well, we'll still talk and we'll have a town hall. How about that? So ABC organized a live solo town hall because Donald Trump dropped out and decided not to do the virtual debate. And then yesterday, NBC announced incredibly that Today Show's Savannah Guthrie would host Trump for an in-person town hall at the same time. How about that? What is your response to that? And, well, we talked about it. We talked about that a lot, and a lot of listeners wanted to weigh in on that issue. Also, of course, you had, and you can hear that conversation coming up in a minute, but you also had Amy Coney Barrett testifying. I think the one clip I want to play is the clip that probably got the most traction when she didn't know the answer to one of the most fundamental questions about the U.S. Constitution. Here is Senator Ben Sasse, Republican from Missouri, asking her the easiest question of the day, and a lot of people were pretty aghast and shocked that she couldn't answer it. Here it is.
What are the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment?
Speech, religion, press, assembly. Speech, press, religion, assembly. I don't know. What am I missing?
Redress or protest.
Okay.
So we addressed that with Kenneth C. Davis. I think he actually brought that up. Also wanted to play for you this series of questions from Kamala Harris, who got Amy Coney Barrett to admit that she believes in science, but not all the time.
And do you accept that COVID-19 is infectious?
I think, yes, I do accept that COVID-19 is infectious, that's something of which I feel like, we could say you take judicial notice of. It's an obvious fact, yes.
Do you accept that smoking causes cancer?
I'm not sure exactly where you're going with this, but, the notice that smoking causes...
The question is what it is. You can answer it if you believe yes or no.
Senator Harris, yes, every package of cigarettes warns that smoking causes cancer.
And do you believe that climate change is happening and is threatening the air we breathe and the water we drink?
Senator, again, I was wondering where you were going with that. You have asked me a series of questions that are completely uncontroversial, like whether COVID-19 is infectious, whether smoking causes cancer, and then trying to analogize that to eliciting an opinion on me that is a very contentious matter, opinion from me that is on a very contentious matter of public debate. And I will not do that. I will not express a view on a matter of public policy, especially one that is politically controversial, because that's inconsistent with the judicial role, as I have explained.
Thank you, Judge Barrett. And you've made your point clear that you believe it's a debatable point.
I mean, that was perfect. That was so perfectly executed by Senator Kamala Harris, who hopefully will be our next vice president and maybe even the first female president. I mean, the odds are high, right? But I just want to tell you that the science regarding tobacco smoking's link to cancer is apparently less conclusive around the science that greenhouse gases are causing the climate, the Earth's planet, to warm. Less consensus, less evidence, less science on tobacco, or there is more science on climate and man's role in those greenhouse gases. I mean, there's no way to spin it. There's no way to twist it. Amy Coney Barrett got nabbed in that moment by your next vice president, hopefully, Senator Kamala Harris. I thought that was a great moment for Kamala Harris. Not such a great moment for Kamala Harris, however, when she appeared on the Rachel Maddow show on MSNBC last night, when Rachel asked for Kamala Harris's take on the NBC town hall that would be opposite Joe Biden. I thought this was a bad moment for both Rachel Maddow and Kamala Harris, which is why I wanted to share it with you.
Are you as mad as everybody else is that NBC is doing a town hall with President Trump tomorrow instead of the debate at the same time that Vice President Biden's going to be on ABC?
I'm not touching that.
Why? What are you laughing? What are you?
That is. Well, let me ask you. Let me ask you a different angle.
Press her.
Should the networks refuse to give the president other opportunities for airtime if he's the one who refuses the chance to debate?
I'm not going to tell the networks what to do, but I'll tell you, I know who I'm going to be watching. So there you go.
Well done. Well done. Your job is safe here. Yeah.
What? Well done. Your job is safe here. I didn't love that exchange. And I like Rachel Maddow. Nobody is perfect, obviously. Everybody deserves criticism. I certainly do as a person in media, but that's my light criticism about that moment. I just didn't love that whole exchange. I'm really curious as to see how the on-air MSNBC progressives are going to handle that decision. And I'd love to hear what's going on behind the scenes. I'm sure some intrepid reporter is going to figure that out. That was a big story yesterday, and a lot of folks wanted to weigh in on it in our conversation last night as well. So I want to share that with you right now, and I want to remind you to sign up for a subscription if you haven't. This show is free, but it isn't cheap. I put a lot of work into it. Matter of fact, it's just after midnight as I'm recording this. Posting it takes a lot of work. Scheduling it, interviews. It's many hours every day that I put into it. Podcast is available every single day for you. I love hearing from you. The community that we're building is available to you. You just got to sign up for as little as $5. Several people signed up yesterday. I'll give shout outs tomorrow night on the show. Running late, way behind, and I want to get this baby posted for you. So here is the conversation that we had actually after we spoke with Kenneth C Davis. And this conversation is about, I think, like 25 minutes or so. And if you don't want to hear that, you can skip ahead to Kenneth C Davis and listen to the big book club that we had, the stand-up book club. All right, here it is from last night, our chat about all these things I've just mentioned with over 50 stand-up listeners, subscribers, and friends. But a lot has been happening in the last few days, and I wanted to see if we could get some reaction from you guys, see how you're doing. We are in the home stretch here with just 20 days left. I'm here with 50 people, 52 folks joining me, and I wanted to talk about a couple of issues that have been happening and getting folks to weigh in. But just generally, my question is, how you doing? I mean, we're stressed, we're exhausted, we're anxious as hell, and there are 20 days left until, I think it's 20 days left until Election Day. And lately, I've been getting some feedback from folks Earlier, I talked to Vicky today, who's helping me mail out T-shirts because I just can't get around to do it. But she's like, I just can't, I can't pay attention to politics as much as I'd like to. And it's just too much. Another listener just emailed me tonight saying, hey, who else do we have that's, not necessarily politics and not necessarily Trump related? I'm with you. And I want to do more of those conversations. But in the next 3 weeks, I'm going to obviously continue to talk about the issues that are on the forefront. And we'll continue to talk about family and stress and anxiety and all the other existential threats that we used to talk about, like climate change and poverty and racism and sexism. But, just today, the president is in Iowa. It can only be described as another super spreader event. I don't know if you've seen pictures of the president with a whole bunch of people in Iowa. By the way, this lazy motherfucker just shows up with the plane, walks off the plane. Like most of these rallies, I think, are at like hangars or at airports. I mean, he just gets off the plane, says, suburban women, would you please like me? I'll never come back here if you don't vote for me. And then gets back on the plane when everybody's infected. And so he's in Iowa today. You had day 3 of Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation hearings. And I think there's 2 other stories that really resonated today on social media. A lot of people reporting, talking about them, which is that NBC has announced that they're going to have a town hall at the same time as Biden's town hall on ABC, which has got people absolutely outraged. And it just seems like a terrible, terrible programming decision for them. I'm really curious to see, if the progressive minded on air people whose names are attached to shows will speak out the way I did at Sirius XM against Steve Bannon, which didn't help me. And then, of course, the New York Post story about Joe Biden, which Facebook and Twitter have said they won't even allow to appear because it's such bullshit. So those are, obviously, I already mentioned Amy Coney Barrett. Does anybody want to weigh in on any of those things or the general first thing that I just said in terms of, how you're dealing with just 3 weeks remaining? And we can have just a bit of a free for all. Anybody want to weigh in on any of those stories? Also, you may see Tom in his hospital bed. Tom and Leslie of Noble Pies. Tom is hanging in there, just had a major surgery, but I'm so glad that you're joining us tonight, Tom. And who else do I necessarily want to give shout outs to? Just you right now, buddy. Good to see your face. You're looking good. Still have all your hair. Okay. Anybody want to weigh in on anything tonight?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Megan.
Tom, get well soon. Please, everybody, call NBC. Scream into the answering machine if that's all it is that you can do. It's ridiculous. Trump said he wouldn't debate. He shouldn't get the airtime. They're part of the problem. Please call them.
Can anybody defend NBC in any way? Is there any defense of NBC? I could almost say, hey, listen, you want to do a town hall with the president? Okay, but not at the exact same time, because clearly it's just trying to get ratings, to beat ABC. Can anybody see a defense of this programming decision by NBC?
No, I just saw online on Twitter,
Derek,
the former vice president of NBC News just basically blasted the entire network, said it's nothing but a raised grab, and she expected that out of Fox, but not NBC. So it is pretty disgusting. I don't know how you can defend it. I just think it's a cheap shot, and it's just one of the reasons why that we have Trump right now is because the media cannot get enough of the ratings, and it's so pathetic. I'm just going to avoid it as much as I can.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how the on-air, kind of progressives, Rachel Maddow, Chris Hayes, Joy Reid, and Lawrence O'Donnell. This is a major news story today. It's about them. They've got to say something. They can't ignore it, and that's, by the way, a huge problem with corporate media is that you can espouse your beliefs all day long, but when your bosses are, doing something contrasting to those beliefs, do you say anything? Do you do anything? Do you call in sick? Me and Michelangelo Signorelli and Mark Thompson at Sirius XM all worked together to make as much noise as we could internally and then publicly, externally about Steve Bannon being brought back. And it did nothing. They brought him back. They lost a ton of money, and then they fired him. And then they fired me. But what are your any other thoughts on NBC? Anybody watching the confirmation hearings today that wants to say anything about Amy Coney Barrett? Because there's a lot to say about that.
Oh, very quickly, I can defend NBC.
Go ahead, Dan.
It is what it is. deal with it.
Good defense.
Right?
Defense.
That's what they're going to do, right? That's what today's media does.
Yeah.
They know they're going to get ratings from it. So the only antidote is to don't watch it.
How about this? Support independent media. Find journalists and shows to send money to that are doing great work. My friend Emily Atkin at Heated, Judd Legum at Popular Info, obviously Stand Up with Pete Dominic, which all of you are already supporting. So independent media.
But how fun is it going to be that the only people who are going to be watching that are the people that say that the media are the enemy of the state? Right?
I should announce the Zoom hangout for that night. We're going to watch Trump, not Biden. No, I'm not. No, ridiculous. Like it's really disappointing and depressing to see that they've announced this. And I wonder if the pressure, if the heat can get hot enough for them to change their mind. I mean, have the town again. I don't have a problem with them hosting a town hall. It's that they're doing it at the exact same time Joe Biden is on ABC, right? I mean, maybe you do. Maybe some of you guys disagree with me that you do have a problem with them. Ty?
I was going to say at work today, be prepared. Everybody across the country, y'all going to get infected like a motherfucker. The vice president and the president are leaving every single day, twice a day, every single day this week. I saw the schedule today.
Wait, what are you saying? They're leaving?
They're flying around. So he's campaigning like a motherfucker.
Yeah.
America's going to test positive.
I mean, we are testing positive.
Times a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every whatever his, I'm pretty sure he's in Iowa and wherever he's at now, but he's coming back tonight. He's going to be gone again tomorrow and back again.
Did you see the reporters today when they asked Trump about Barron? How's Barron doing? And it almost seemed like he just found out that Barron was COVID positive. Like that guy, like I haven't said this anywhere on the record, but I will now, and I will anywhere else. Like, you're not supposed to talk about the president's, kids who are minors, no matter who the president is. And I'm not talking about Barron Trump. I'm talking about the fact that there is, honestly, and I pay close attention. I've never, ever seen Donald Trump show any interest in his son. I don't know that he sees him, spends any time with him. I mean, obviously it's true of his older sons, but they're adults and daughters. But I mean, like, there's no evidence that he has ever taken an interest in his youngest son who lives with him at the White House. And that's even as a show, even as just like, to fake it, it just doesn't seem to be there. He probably had no idea that Barron was sick.
That NBC thing, how did they think it wouldn't happen? When Trump said he wouldn't do the debate, and everybody said, how can he do that? How can he do that? He is behind in the ratings. He needs this 80 million people.
Yeah.
Who didn't think for a second he would get airtime anytime he wants it?
I hear you, Joe, but again, the only thing I'm saying is, why at that exact time? Why at that exact time? Why would they?
Because he can.
Because he can, but NBC has to know, just the way SiriusXM, I keep going back to it because I was inside that. SiriusXM made a decision to bring Steve Bannon back. As a result, they lost thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of subscribers. And then they fired him. How do they not know that they're going to tarnish their own image and lose money as a result? I mean, I think that the answer is these executives at media companies. I know it for a fact. I meet these people, especially at places like Aspen Ideas, which I went to. These people, guys, are so unbelievably stupid. They really are stupid. I think we are conditioned to think that executives at companies are, quote, successful people that make a lot of money, that have the corner office, that have all the stock options, somehow got there because they were really smart. But the phrase that I use so often when I would meet these executives are, honest to God, I would say it to myself is, I would look at other people like, I don't know where this guy's talent lies. I have no idea how he got to that position. This guy is stone cold stupid and he's running the company. And it's very true of media executives. I mean, Jeff Zucker is a pretty smart guy. I'll say that about Jeff Zucker. And he's kind of an exception, but he's not likable. And he's got a lot of obviously issues. But anyway, who else wants to weigh in on anything else?
I just have one more thing to say about the NBC. The worst part about this is is it just keeps reinforcing his bad behavior.
Well said.
He leaves the debate because he throws a temper tantrum because he doesn't want to do it virtually, so he can interrupt everyone Biden any chance he can. And so Biden does his own thing to get his voice out there. And then Trump, instead of just like taking the L, he's like, well, I want to just show up Joe because that's just how I am. And NBC just rewards it. It's mind numbing to me. And I don't understand how anyone can't see through this. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but it hurts my head.
I like the idea of calling. We should all call.
Yeah, where's that number? Somebody put it up in the chat if you haven't already. Megan, I'm looking at you. You made that suggestion.
The number is in my Twitter feed. Let me pull it up. I tweeted it this morning.
All right, Tana, thank you. Randolph?
Jared Yates Sexton. I hope everybody's listening to him. He has a really great take on the Senate confirmation hearings. He puts it in the context of the 400-year drama that's been playing out in America when white aristocracy is trying to hold on to power, and she is the latest round.
Jared is really great. Watch he's got his podcast, he's got his Sunday night bourbon drinking on YouTube, and of course his book American Rule, and he's been joining me a lot. Great guy. I've become pretty good friends with him. I really like him a lot. Who else?
You want a note of optimism?
Everybody wants a note about no.
I'm the one that tweeted you this morning saying we need more uplifting stories. But I'll tell you, listening to people talk, seeing the lines at the polls, everybody's so involved. I think we got this. And I know they say don't get happy, get out and vote. But I think this is a landslide of epic proportions. When I hear today that 160 million people are voting, probably the highest number ever.
Yeah, no, I think I feel really confident about what we're seeing in the polling, in the data. I don't know if you heard today's episode of the podcast. I grabbed this clip from, what's his name?
Carville.
Who was it?
Carville.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Oh, yeah, that was good.
James Carville had a lot to say. Also, if you didn't hear my note of optimism, I've posted it everywhere. I said it, but last year at this time, I lost my lucrative corporate media job and the health insurance that went with it. My dad had a heart attack and permanently lost vision in his right eye. My daughter had to be put in a back brace for scoliosis. 1 year later, I've rebuilt my career. I'm rebuilding it. Thanks to all you guys. My dad rode 60 miles on his bike this week. My daughter's curve in her spine has stopped, and so many of you guys have shown such amazing support along the way. I'll not forget that. Things are obviously far from easy for me and all of you, but I do hope that you're all finding some light in the darkness, and anybody who wants to share it here is always welcome. And then I just wrap that post up with, now let's go vote this motherfucker out and send him back to Mother Russia. I do fantasize about him going like Edward Snowden, like back to Russia to escape prosecution. Yeah, they'll live in a little tiny embassy together. All right.
Deutsche Bank go.
Nathan.
Yeah, man. When I dropped my daughter off for kindergarten, she was 5 years old. The day after the election in 2016, I didn't know what the hell to do. I mean, I had tears in my eyes. I got out of the car. You normally don't do that in the car alone. But I got out, I walked around, and I hugged her because I knew that this authoritarian asshole who disgraced women, who hated women, was going into power. And listening to your show when it was on Sirius XM, and I heard Kenneth C Davis, went and got the book. Got that. I got I got my books ready. Got the Howard Zinn.
There you go.
Read these two books, and it gave me hope because it made me realize that we've been to these deep, dark places before. And it made me realize it in a way that I never understood it before, as much as I've always loved history. But it also made me realize we're at a line of demarcation from everything we've ever known and all the challenges we faced, and what this monster is proposing to do to our nation, our country.
When I started the show, the whole goal was to fight apathy. It was stand up for something. So every day I'd try to find different issues that people are dealing with, problems that people are dealing with, and try to understand them and get educated on them with experts. It was stand up against apathy. Find something to stand up for, or, against. But I don't think that's any longer true because of Trump. Not nobody. I've been talking to a lot of young people at colleges, and there's some pretty apathetic folks, but I think people have woken up. I think, the silver lining is this guy really woke a lot of people up to, what can happen. And a lot of damage has been done and won't be undone for a long time. And I don't know, but I still remain, I am very optimistic, and I might be an absolute fool, but I'm very optimistic. I know people are forming militias. I know people are going to be really, really angry. But I don't think they want to go to jail. Most people, I think they just meet and they congregate and they commiserate. But I'm just not as worried as a lot of my smart friends are. So I don't know.
When I try to stay in the moment, when I try to be mindful, as weird as it sounds, the history that I've read in these books gives me some sort of peace.
Great.
If that makes sense.
I'm glad to hear that. Karen, and then I'm going to wrap it up. Karen Madison, I think you were trying to jump in, weren't you? Are you still there, Karen?
No, but I'll say hi.
Oh, I thought you were trying to jump in. Sorry.
No, but what I was texting you in the beginning of my trip, but I just had a glorious disconnection weekend. I was able to really just come to some good places with some meditation and yoga and hiking and animals.
Nature.
And
I saw you in nature. You had bees all over you.
Yeah, I went to a beehive, and I just think it's, for me, I know I met you when I was at this really wild point and just not being ready for this quarantine, but I feel like I have come back to being myself.
Oh, yes.
And I am about to take over the world in my little corner of the universe. And one of the things is, I'm going to get out and vote, but I live close to DC. I don't really want to be out in the streets. So I'm kind of freaking out about that. And I don't think any amount of time in nature is going to cure me of that.
Well,
I am freaked the hell out about being out in the COVID city of DC.
Well, I understand that. If anybody needs an escort to vote, and I'm serious, if anybody's worried about going out and somebody in this community can provide that, that'd be really cool too, as a resource. This community is growing, and it's really cool. If you haven't checked out the Discord chat, it's really great. John, who was here, set that up. I'd love to have you guys check in on that. And there you are, John. Anything that you want to say about the Discord platform, John, before I say goodbye?
Okay. So on a whim, I guess, on the first Zoom I was able to get on with Pete, I said I saw a thing from Therese about joining a cell phone thing, and I'm like, I don't really want to give out my cell phone number. So Discord allows you to create a separate account and do a text chat. Basically, it just sits there, and if you've used Microsoft Teams or Slack, it's very similar. But it also has a voice chat feature where you can have a chat room with a bunch of people talking, and then if we all want to turn on video, you can get 25 people in there having a video, not as big as a Zoom, but still a smaller thing. And there are people in there until at least 1:40 a.m. because that's about as late as I usually am.
Yeah. But, it's awesome. So join up.
The second shift takes over.
Okay, that is the chat from last night. I hope you enjoy hearing from all of those voices, listeners, subscribers, and friends, and I hope that you will become one of those voices. You don't have to join the Zoom chats or the Discord platform. You could just be a passive listener of the podcast, or you just want to support me and check in from time to time. Either way, I'm so psyched to have you. I hope that you will subscribe to the podcast and give it a rating. And now to our chat with Kenneth C. Davis, who is on Twitter at Kenneth C. Davis. Don'tKnowMuch.com is the website. And of course, I mentioned the book about 50 times, but Strongman, the Rise of Five Dictators and the Fall of Democracy. Here it is right now, Kenneth C. Davis. I am very excited to have you here tonight for our book club, where we are welcoming to our hangout and to the book club the great Kenneth C. Davis, who hopefully most of you already know, but if you don't, he's simply the best. He is a best-selling author. His series of Don't Know Much About History and other books is awesome. Don'tKnowMuch.com. Don't know much about the Bible, the Civil War, geography, history. don't know much about the American presidents, America's hidden history, don't know much about mythology, more deadly than war. And tonight we will be discussing Strongman, the rise of five dictators and the fall of democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Let's give a big round of applause, or at least move your hands together, not that we can hear you, all for Kenneth C. Davis for joining us again. And thank all of you for supporting the show, the podcast, and being a subscriber to it. Kenneth C. Davis, welcome.
Hello, Pete. It is good to be with you.
Great to have you, and great to have everybody here. I'll ask a few questions. I've interviewed you twice now, part 1 and 2 for this book, and tonight is the big live chat. I hope everybody will buy the book. If you haven't bought it yet, you can see links in the chat, and you can keep that going. If anybody has questions you want to put in there, I will ask them. And on that note, Ken, let me turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Pete. Thanks for having me in. Hello, everybody. I'm really looking forward to talking to you all tonight. This is fun. Great. So we'll have some fun, although the subject is not fun, obviously. Pete, you and I have known each other a long time. Don't know much about history. Came out 30 years ago. It's hard for me to believe that. This is a new 30th anniversary edition. It's a book about questions about American history. And Pete and I first started talking to each other. I don't really know how long it's been, but it's been a while. And it was because of that book. And so it's the book that brought us together. So here we are. And we've had some great conversations over the years. And I really appreciate the fact that you value history and value talking and thinking about history and bringing it to your audience in a way that makes it meaningful. It's really important. It's as important as it's ever been in my life of watching and listening to politics. I got interested in politics when I was a kid. It was 1968. I was 14 years old, but look, the world was changing around us. Vietnam was going on. JFK, Martin Luther King, and Robert F. Kennedy, two of my childhood heroes. Two of these great people on the world stage were assassinated within weeks of each other when I was 14. The world was shaking underneath us. A few months later, the Democratic Convention in Chicago. So that was the kind of atmosphere, the changes that were going on in the 60s when I was growing up, and got me interested in looking at and watching politics, even though I'd always been interested in history from the time I was a much younger kid. My father, who was a World War II vet, his idea of summer vacation was to throw us in the back of the car with some Army surplus tents and sleeping bags, and we'd go off to places like Gettysburg and Valley Forge and Fort Ticonderoga in upstate New York. And I always had the sense that history does not happen in books, even though I'm sitting in front of all these books. History happens to real people in real places. And if we tell those stories of real people doing real things with real people, it becomes alive, it becomes meaningful. We see the connections to our own lives. And more importantly, we make the connections between the past and the present. It is not a long list of dates and battles and speeches. It's really everything that's happened to get us where we are today and what we should learn from the past to figure things out and do it right. That's what I've been doing for 30 years. And most of that time I've been fairly optimistic and like to have fun with history. And right now I don't feel very optimistic, and history is not a lot of fun.
Yeah, well said. Your microphone will be rubbing on that lovely vest the whole time. So just maybe pull on it so it doesn't. Yeah, there you go. You'll hear it.
I will do that. I'm sorry.
And it reminds you talk about your dad taking you to Fort Ticonderoga. I took the girls to a Civil War battlefield, and they never looked up from their phones. So my how times have changed. Okay, so let's get right to it. Let's jump into the book. The book is Strongman, everybody. That's what we're talking about tonight. And I'll just go ahead and ask the question that I think is really the elephant in the room, which is why so sexist with the title?
Nobody has asked me that question before, and that's an interesting one.
I ask the hard questions. It's what I do. I'm basically like the Chuck Todd of Zoom book clubs.
Certainly, the fact is that the five men in this book are all the five figures in this book are all men. And I could say with a reasonable degree of confidence, historically, there have been very few strong women in history when we are talking about ruthless dictators who will use every bit of their power to maintain power and ruthlessly kill millions of people. Now, there certainly have been women, and some of them are included in this book, who have been willing accomplices to some of the strong men I point to. But obviously, this is throughout history, most of these situations have been led by men in the positions of power. There's really no one I can think of. Chairman Mao's wife, who I discuss in the book, of course, was a fairly ruthless character known as Madame Mao. She was part of what was known as the Gang of Four, and she eventually came to her end as well. So, in fact, look, this is real history. These men were in positions of power. Many of them had relationships with a lot of women, but not necessarily the kind of relationships I'm going to write about in this book. So we're really talking about men who have led their countries, taken their countries down a dangerous and deadly path. How did they do it? How did they accomplish that? What do we need to know to avoid it if we think democracy is worth saving? So that's really at the heart of the book. So it's a good gotcha question. Thank you, Pete, for asking that. And I just want to say one other thing, since we're asking gotcha questions tonight. If you are up for a nomination to the Supreme Court and someone asks you what the First Amendment guarantees, it's pretty easy. Speech, press, religion, petition, and assembly.
Yeah, she missed that today. She should have had a cheat sheet. That was a clip that certainly went viral. That must have been, it's like when you didn't know the answer in algebra and you're like, your whole body heats up with embarrassment and humiliation. But that's just, in your class and algebra. On the world stage, while up for the most important job, arguably, in government, not getting that right stinks. Strongman, The Rise of Five Dictators and the Fall of Democracy, profiles Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, and Saddam Hussein. Snake pit gonna get you, not gonna Saddam. And I wonder if there was anybody on the bubble that you didn't choose to put in there that you were thinking about throwing in there. Was there a sixth that will there be a book two?
No book two in the works, none in the plan. Look, I could have taken, there's a wide field, a wide range of murderous dictators, primarily in the 20th century. I didn't want to go, too far back in history. We could, go to Chinese emperors and Roman emperors and find murderous dictators. But I wanted to really talk about these men who have come to symbolize what a dictator means in modern history. Sure, I could have included quite a few. I mentioned some of them in the final chapter of the book, which is called Never Again. People like Pol Pot or I'm drawing a blank right now on Idi Amin, Big Daddy Idi Amin, who was rather ruthless and presented somewhat comically on the world stage.
Genghis Khan?
Vlad the Impaler, the prototype for Dracula. So yeah, there are lots of people who would fit into this mold. But, I'm talking about people, I guess, because they influenced the course of 20th century history and they still factor into our lives and our history in such a large way. I wanted to focus on them. Also because they are in the modern age in which the techniques of the strongman which involve mass media to a large degree, the use of propaganda. Those are things that, were not available to the murderous dictators of older periods in history. So this is really a reflection about what modern dictatorship looks like and how a strong man is able to amass such power. And the use of media and the use of propaganda is certainly central to all of these men and all of what they do. And certainly it's one of the most important questions in our time as we deal with the questions of media and media responsibility and how to sort out fake news and propaganda from fact.
Yeah, and I just wanted to throw in there before we go back to the book that the relevant, of course, Putin, Xi of Japan, Bolsonaro of Brazil, Orban, Erdogan, Bill B. Who am I missing? Duterte in the Philippines. The Philippines. I mean,
Hun Sen in Cambodia.
So I think that it's super important because I want to say something clever, but I don't have it, about why history matters so that you don't repeat it, Ken.
Well, let me address that because it's really an important issue to me. It's an important question to me, this idea. First of all, this idea that history...
Address your microphone again while you're at it. Sorry. You sound great. It's just when it rubs on your...
okay.
Just pull it out. Hold it out a little bit.
I'll do a little,
give it a tug.
Chippendales here.
All right. Take off the vest. We got a whole new show. Go ahead. The importance of history right now. It's like I feel like I read a lot of policy books, like trying to solve big problems, but I think that, a history book is a policy book because it teaches you this is what's happening right now. It's happening again, ladies and gentlemen, the rise of strongmen.
Okay. A lot of people have this notion history repeats itself, and it's kind of in the context of Bill Murray and Groundhog Day. He just keeps reliving the same moment. And it's not that way when we talk about history repeating itself. Certainly some themes, some things happen time and time again. And that's why we want to study the past, to look at the patterns, to look at what happened in Germany, in Italy 100 years ago, or nearly 100 years ago in Germany, so that we can learn from that. Just as when I wrote More Deadly Than War, and we've talked about that in the past, the book about the Spanish flu and World War I, the influenza pandemic of 1918, what we should have learned from that piece of history to give us some guidance in how to deal with a current pandemic. Clearly, many people didn't read the book and certainly didn't get the lessons of history as far as that goes. So that's why I really think it's important. It's not this simplistic idea of history repeating itself, but yes, we should really learn the lessons of how these men came to power. We can look at the patterns that they used, and we can try to avoid repeating them if we think this democracy is worth saving. Now, I talk about the history of democracy in this book because a lot of us take it for granted. I certainly took it for granted, I'd have to say. And when we got to the point of a few decades ago now that the Soviet Union crumbled, the Berlin Wall fell down, apartheid ended, the British and the Irish seemed to be talking to each other. It seemed to be this great moment of democracy flowering around the world. And we thought this was a new world order. And it lasted a little while, but not terribly long. And since 2000, I think that there's been a tremendous reversal. And some of the countries you've named are typical of that. Some of the countries that became fledgling democracies in the demise of the Soviet Union, Hungary, Poland at the top of the list, and others, have turned to authoritarians. There are a complicated set of reasons for that, but we can look still to see that these guys use the same techniques that these five men that I've focused on used over the past 100 years to accumulate power, to crush resistance, to eliminate any sense of liberties, freedoms, and rights in these countries, and of course, at enormous toll of human lives in wars, in mass starvation, in the extermination of political enemies, in labor camps. The list goes on. It's a frightful list. And we should really have eyes wide open as we go forward.
All right. I've got maybe one or two questions. And just as a reminder, I've already interviewed Ken twice, part 1 and 2, about this book. We really get into the nitty gritty, the beginning that you just mentioned about democracy, and all 5 of the strongmen that you mentioned a bit. So I highly recommend if you want to go back and listen to that. But I hope that you'll have questions, because I'd rather have it be your questions for Ken, since I've asked so many already. So if you do, great. If you don't, fine. I've got plenty, of course. I think, though, it is kind of interesting and important that you mentioned in both part 1 and 2, I believe, of our conversations about your new book, you mentioned Orwell, specifically Animal Farm, even. When you talk about the techniques used to accumulate power by strong men and authoritarian leaders, it's easy to look at some of his writing and have that illustrate what we see. Why, what are the parallels there, and why do you bring up George Orwell's work in both 1984 and Animal Farm when you think about these authoritarians and their rise to power?
Well, George Orwell was a person who had gone to the Spanish Civil War and to fight fascism, the fascism of General Franco in Spain, which was supported, of course, by Mussolini and by Hitler. These two fascist authoritarian leaders were giving assistance to General Franco as he was battling the Republicans in Spain in a civil war that preceded the World War II conflict. Orwell watched as Stalinist communists then came in and suppressed the people who were fighting against Franco because they wanted to control the situation. And he saw that power is about power. And that's what he actually says in 1984. The object of power is power. The object of torture is torture. And so those are really important ideas, I think, to understand that these men, whatever their professed ideology, are essentially interested in accruing power, accumulating power, and concentrating power, and crushing any opposition. So those are important lessons, and that's what Orwell really devoted his life to. And Animal Farm, I just reread it, and we had a conversation about it when just after I'd reread it, is, I think, in many ways, even more important than 1984. 1984 is this elaborate dystopian novel. Animal Farm is a short, almost, he calls it a fairy tale, in which the animals rebel against the humans on Manor Farm, throw them over. 2 pigs, Napoleon and Snowball, quickly emerge as the leaders of the revolution, and very quickly the freedom that the animals have obtained for themselves becomes a new form of oppression. It's an allegory of Stalin taking over the Russia and ultimately the Soviet Union. Napoleon, the pig, is the stand-in for Stalin, and Snowball is a stand-in for Trotsky, who was Stalin's rival as a member of the Communist Party, eventually pushed out and eventually assassinated in Mexico. So it's a very simplistic but perfect story about how an authoritarian takes a movement, co-opts it, and then makes it about his accruing personal power. And so both of these books really explain a lot about totalitarianism, authoritarianism, in a very simple and 1984 dramatic way. The key to let me just say one thing first. The key to all of these men that I've talked about, and we probably discussed this, I want to put this out right away. They all present themselves as populists, nationalists in some respect, and they are looking to make their country great or restore past greatness. Mussolini wanted to make modern Italy, a reflection of ancient Rome and its glories. Hitler wants to bring some mythic notion of Germany back to the fore. They blame their country's situation on some external force, whether it's foreigners, immigrants, a religious group, obviously Jews in the case of Hitler, or a political party, communists, socialists, Bolsheviks, blaming, scapegoating someone. Using an emergency, whether real or created, to add to this sense of urgency that the country must respond to this crisis. And finally, calls for ending the corruption and bringing law and order. So those are the four key elements that these men all use to get into power. And then from there, they go into a whole series of things, very typical steps to cement their power, often starting with eliminating the free press. And so these are all very clear warning signs of an authoritarian, a strongman making his moves.
All right. Well, I was about to ask one more question, but you kind of answered it, which was going to be, how does a country's population fall to a dictator? And I think you actually just answered some of that right there. But I really want to turn it over to some of the folks that are joining us here tonight. We have, let me see, it says 53 people participating tonight. So I would love to get some questions from the gang, the stand-up community hanging out here with me. And as always, I do have a question planted so that there isn't an awkwardness at the beginning. And because he is one of my closest friends and one of the smartest people I know, joins me on a regular basis. And I'll just say it to his face, what I've been saying behind his back. I don't always agree with everything that he says, but I think that his perspective on things is really interesting, especially because he uses history so much. And I'd rather hear Bill B. in D.C.'s take on politics and then almost anybody that I see sitting at the table at MSNBC, CNN, etc. So, Bill, you're a history nerd, if anybody is. Even your image there when you go off camera is somebody from history. Who is that? Is it a relative or something?
Yeah, that's actually my. Hold on, I'll show you. That's my great-great-grandfather who fought all day in the cornfield at Antietam. For the North, I should probably point out.
Yeah. All right. So you probably have some smarty pants question for Kenneth C. Davis. Thank you for joining us and get us started. And let me know in the chat who's next. Go ahead, buddy.
So Professor Davis, thank you, by the way. Very interesting. And Pete, thank you for all the kind comments. One thing that I noticed today during Amy Coney Barrett's hearing is how she was unable, she felt, to give basically straight up answers about whether she supported the idea of a peaceful transfer of power, whether she supported, very basic constitutional and legal rights that Americans have. And I will say that, I know people in common with Amy Coney Barrett who are attorneys. And I was reaching out to them today and saying, and I'll be blunt, what the fuck are you guys doing? How hard is it for her? Why is it hard at all for her to just say, look, I believe in the peaceful transfer of power? And the answers I got were very interesting. Most of it was she doesn't want to piss off Donald Trump because then he might pull her nomination because he's crazy. And I have a thesis that basically what really brings fascists into power isn't often just that they're fascists, that there's enough fascists. It's the opportunism that goes along with it. For every fascist you have 5 opportunists, and that's enough to seize power. And I saw Amy Coney Barrett's hearing today, and I thought, wow, you're seeing opportunism in action. And Pete had already asked me to come on tonight and talk to you or to ask you a question. And my question is, do you think that's sort of basically dispositive to your thesis that even someone like Amy Coney Barrett feels that she must kiss the ring in very undemocratic ways in order to get this position she's always wanted? And
before you answer, Ken, Bill, where are you on peaceful transfer of power? For? Against?
Depends who wins on November 3rd. I'm going to take after my great-great-grandfather, I suspect, if something goes wrong.
Ken?
A really interesting and a question that I have been pondering sort of all day long. I actually have not watched the hearings. I've been dipping in and out of commentary and certainly seeing some of the questions that she has been asked. That's why I did not glibly mention that there's a easy way to remember the answer to that question, which most seventh graders can probably answer the 5 rights guaranteed by the First Amendment. But look, the game plan for every nominee who comes to the Supreme Court, who is nominated to the Supreme Court and comes before this Senate committee now, those rules were completely rewritten after the Bork hearings and to a degree after the Thomas hearings. And the rules were rewritten to be as inoffensive as possible and to answer as little as possible within the realm of common sense. I think we've now gone past the realm of common sense because this nominee would not answer if the criminal code says that you cannot, intimidate voters. It clearly does. So I think that it's personally speaking, I don't want to, get into the realm of whether she's kissing the ring or not. I think that it's more just a political strategy at this point to not say anything that could then be used as ammunition. Because this is an era in which anything that you say that's just off tone then becomes political ammunition. I think that they are completely aware that without some really historic break in the next couple of days that relate to this voting, the Republicans have the votes. And, that's Stalin used to say that he didn't care who voted. He just cared who counted the votes, and he counted the votes. Mitch McConnell knows how to count the votes, and I'm sure that they are aware of that. So short of an astonishing revelation or astonishing change, I think, if this nomination goes to the floor of the Senate, it's going to clear. And so that's what they're trying to do. Skate through this process, which has really become a kind of kabuki drama where people ask these standard questions and these very standard non-answers are given. That's the game plan. And it probably will work. So that's why I think that it's not so much her. And again, I have no special insight to this. This is just completely an observer's opinion that the process has became so politicized that people could no longer give reasonably common sense answers to basic questions, whether it's about climate change or climate change may come before the court, but that doesn't have anything to do with the fact that she was asked whether she thinks that there's the science behind climate change. So I think that those are that has just become part of the political game that is played on television in these hearings, and it's just an unfortunate outgrowth of the deep politicization of the court. If you go back to look at even Scalia and Ginsburg, were both approved by something like 90 plus votes each. That's not going to happen any longer just because of the deep partisanship and politicization of the court.
All right, let's get back to the book and any questions anybody has about Ken's new book, which is so great. If you haven't gotten Strongman, go buy it now. The Rise of Five Dictators, The Fall of Democracy, Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, and Saddam. Who's up next? Who else has a question for
Pete, I got
Ken?
a question.
Derek.
Yeah. Hey, Kenneth, I love your work. You've taught a lot. I actually was telling the chat that you're listening to you talk about the Spanish flu. I had to correct someone the other day about saying that it was actually from Kansas, not Spain. So thank you for that.
That's awesome.
But one of the more nefarious strongmen that I know of is Pinochet. Is there a reason why he wasn't included in your book, or how he kind of is similar or different from how he acted compared to everyone else that you listed?
Yeah, there was a wide choice of leaders from the 20th century, especially in Latin America, who could have been included here. And it's not an encyclopedia of dictators. I was trying to narrow the focus and give 5 of what I think are the most, certainly the most notable and reprehensible figures. For sure. And Saddam I included because of his intricate and interwoven connections to American history in the recent past. That's why I chose him. Certainly, there are, along with Pinochet, a number of other strongmen of South America who could, and Central America, who could have been included. The disappearance in Argentina, all those periods. So there's a long and ghastly history that we can talk about. But again, that's kind of outside the purview of this book. It was meant to be brief and focus on 5 people so that I could humanize this story and present really the kind of archetypes of these men. So there's certainly other people like a Pinochet who fit into that. Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines fits into it. You can go down a long list. Pol Pot in Cambodia. I mentioned Idi Amin in Uganda. What happened in Rwanda is certainly a notorious example, although there wasn't a single strongman quite the same way in Rwanda as there were in some of these other cases. And the other thing I have to really point out here is that even though I'm talking about one man as the central figure, the central actor, none of these men could do what they did without a lot of willing accomplices. The generals, the political leaders who in some cases thought that they could control these men, particularly Mussolini and Hitler. They were brought into power because men who were already in power thought that they would be easily controlled, kind of puppets, and they were tragically mistaken. In some cases, religious leaders, certainly in the case of Mussolini, the Vatican was a supporter, even though Mussolini was no friend of Catholicism, although he would do things that the Vatican was happy about. But the Vatican saw him as the best response to what they really feared, which is the encroachment of communism. That was the great fear for the Catholic Church in Europe. In Germany, the Lutheran Church was the predominant church. Other Protestant Christians were very much behind Hitler. They had no problem with his anti-Semitism, and they also feared communism, socialism, Bolshevism. So there are always willing accomplices to these men, and that's why it's important to remember, even though I'm singling them out as individuals, none of them acted alone, and that's where kind of we come in. Are we going to be a collaborator, a bystander? A collaborator, gets involved and joins right in. The bystander sort of says, well, I'm going to stay out of this. And then there are the upstanders. And in these 5 stories, most of the upstanders did not end up very well unless they got out early enough. Upstanders generally tend to be, the ones who are executed, deposed, deported, or put into prison camps.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that you read about in the book. With all authoritarians, they often throw in prison the political dissidents, the revolutionary leaders. They penalize them, and there's nobody left. There's no intellectuals left. There's a brain drain. There's a leadership drain. And now I'm just saying things and making things up. John Carroll.
No, you're not making things up.
Well, I'm not making things up. I'm just not being very articulate. And I'm just trying to.
Well, let me just point to Mussolini as a perfect example, because that's why I think that, I'm giving these men as examples of how they did it. Mussolini, once he comes into power, establishes the fascist party. They have phony elections. A senator gets up in the Italian Senate legislature, because Italy, again, is a constitutional democracy when Mussolini comes to power. He's an elected official who's made prime minister. Somebody complains that the election they just had was riddled by fraud and corruption. He disappears the next day and is found murdered a few weeks later. Mussolini then moves to make the press swear loyalty to the fascist party and to the state. He makes every university professor in Italy swear loyalty to the fascist party and the Italian state. 1,200 university professors sign, 12 do not. So, collaborators and bystanders and upstanders. The upstanders, the ones who did not sign, for the most part, were expelled or deported or sent out of the country. Some were sent into internal exile called confino. Later on, of course, Mussolini adopts Hitler's Nuremberg laws in Italy, and so Jewish resistors in particular were either murdered or sent off to camps. So this is part of the story as well. The suppression of opposition, legally or otherwise, is key to the strongman's cementing power.
John.
Wow. Thanks, Kenneth C Davis. This is great. Thanks, Pete. I was wondering about Ceausescu came up in your book. I can't wait to read your book, but I was just thinking today, and I got a chill up my spine when you were just talking about this, because I was thinking about what Sarah Kendzior said on your show yesterday, Pete, which was wonder who would rank profile wise, stature wise, to be an enemy worth rounding up in this country, like who Trump would start rounding up, or Barr start rounding up in that manner. No, but I was more concerned with, I was thinking about older times where, before our present isolationism, supposedly, where our leader is coddling these strongmen globally, that hearkening back to a more innocent time, perhaps, when we were courting leaders trying to get nationalists in other countries that were important to us to be allied with us, or they would be allied with Russia or with China. But in those days, like during the Cold War, it was more or less Russia or us. And who do you see now, where I'm sure there's more than just one or few people, leaders of other nations, twisting in the breeze, wondering who to be aligned with? Someone that would be like more of like a Sukarno, Indonesia president during the 60s and 70s and late 50s, perhaps, maybe 60s, 70s, and who kind of refused to be aligned with one against or the other. And no one knew really how to deal with him, because he wanted to, hey, I'm president of my country. You can be my friend for this, and you can be my friend for that. And we didn't know whether to crap or wind our wristwatch around that, back in the, the Dulles brothers era.
Right. Yeah, no, what you're referring to obviously is, this great period from the end of World War II. And I touch on this in some respects because in talking about Stalin, we go from this man who was the ally, who was crucial in the defeat of Hitler. There's no question that the Soviet Union and the Red Army had an awful lot to do with the ultimate destruction of Hitler's war machine. So how do we move from treating him as this wartime ally to treating him as the greatest enemy of the United States? And there was certainly some naivete.
We were naive to this
on the part of, certainly Roosevelt to a degree and Truman to a degree. But then we get very quickly, almost before the war is even really over, moving from the war against Germany and Japan to the Cold War. And it influenced everything that happened in this country and every diplomatic maneuver that we had in this country and almost all foreign policy decisions for the next 50 years until the end of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. So there's no question about it. So when you look at this is not really an area I go to in great detail in this book. I've certainly discussed it in other books. The fact that the anti-communist party policies that start with Truman essentially really dominate American domestic and foreign politics for the next 50 years. There's no question about it. I believe it was Truman. Somebody said to him, well, this guy over here, I forget who he was talking about specifically, is a real son of a bitch. And he said, yeah, he's a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. And that's kind of what it comes down to in terms of American history and American foreign policy. And you can go down the list of Marcos, the Duvaliers in Haiti.
It's actually how Trump refers to Jared Kushner. I don't know if people knew that, but.
Sorry?
Nothing. That screwed that all up.
In those days, wasn't it even, it was a little binary in terms of the communism era because it was the godless and the God-fearing, right? Because it was kind of a binary thing, and that doesn't appear to be as much of a thing anymore either.
No, I think that the religious aspect of it, which was certainly powerful in the anti-communist era, has been largely removed, not completely removed. But again, this is a little bit far afield from the story I'm telling in this book. But it's really important to realize that I've set up this story in which I'm talking about not about American leadership and only in respect to some of these people, but as I said, this is certainly a subject I've dealt with in other books in the past. But look, for most of the past 50, let's say 75 years since the end of World War II, and I'm a child of a guy who drove a truck across North Africa and Italy during the war, so this was, has some resonance for me. We believed that, for all our flaws, that the United States was still essentially the spokesperson, the leadership in the idea of democratic progress, even though there were a lot of mistakes along the way. I'm the first to point all of them out. And that's what has really changed in the past decade or so, and certainly in the last 4 years, that the United States has withdrawn from its singular position as the leader of the ideas of human rights, democracy, freedom around the world. For all of the flaws of I like to say we are the most exceptional thing in America in our history is that we haven't yet fallen prey to a strongman. Over 230 years since the Constitution was written. In our two greatest crises, the American Civil War, we got Abraham Lincoln, and in the Great Depression, and then the run-up to World War II, we got Franklin D. Roosevelt. At the same time that Italy got Mussolini and Hitler took power in Germany. So that's pretty exceptional. Those two men, Lincoln and Roosevelt, made mistakes. They were imperfect. They had flaws. They were human. But they were committed to, I would say, expanding freedom and rights and democracy rather than crushing them. And so that, to me, is what is singular about our history and quite exceptional about our history.
Although potentially no longer true now, right? I mean, we got Trump. He is the archetype here, so.
He certainly fits into a lot of the things that I've said. And I want to be very clear that this is not a book that mentions anyone in current political leadership in the United States of America. It's really a book of history with lessons to learn. So if you ask me, flat out, is he an authoritarian? Is he a strongman? Is he a Mussolini? I would say he certainly aspires to be one, but he's not there yet.
Although Mussolini would never contract a virus and then go share it with his followers. I don't think he was that bad.
Well, he probably contracted a few things and shared them with some people. But
Greg and
go in that
Beth in Kentucky have a question, and I have a question as to why they don't turn heat on in their home, because Beth is under a blanket, as I can see here on the Zoom. Greg is in a short sleeve shirt, so there's a real issue in the marriage. Greg, who's got the question?
Why we don't turn the heat on. Professor Davis, thank you. Are you familiar with Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast? Sorry, Pete.
I must say I am not. I'm not a podcast listener, to be honest. So no.
The man sits in his apartment and writes with a quill and by candlelight.
What is a podcast? No, I'm not that bad.
A couple of years ago, he did a fascinating one looking at the role of drugs on leaders throughout history, and Hitler was one of them. He talked about, I think it was methamphetamine use by Hitler, and I just wondered if you were familiar with that and had some background on it, and also if any of the other people, either in your book here or throughout history, that you know of that were possibly affected by drug use.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I remember specifically a book, and I don't know if the guy who did the podcast wrote the book or maybe had referred to it. There was a book about the Nazi drug orgy frenzy that was going on, and other people have said that there were Nazis who were into Satanism and spiritualism. I think there are a lot of these kind of external explanations for this behavior. And while they might have been interesting and significant, they don't really explain the nature of an entire nation going down the path of following Hitler. I don't think that Hitler needed anything artificial or chemical to initially attract the crowds and the audiences that he did. I'm talking about in the early 1920s, when he's first beginning to establish his routine, so to speak, and his performance. And they were very, very carefully practiced performances, but he would dazzle crowds. And he was not, it's very important, I think, to realize he was not telling them something new. He was not telling them something they hadn't heard before. He was not telling them something new to believe in. He was kind of telling them what they already thought, but he was saying it, and he was saying it out loud, and he was saying it in a clear, unambiguous voice, and he could rile them up to a point of frenzy. So even if he at some point was on methamphetamines, the whole German nation wasn't. So when you see 10,000 people at Nuremberg shouting and screaming his name, and of course it's then amplified by a propaganda film like The Triumph of the Will. One of the geniuses of cinema is Lenny Reifenstahl, who was a woman who made documentaries for Hitler that everyone watched in this country for years. And there are children who just grew up believing this was my Führer, my leader, and it was godlike. And that creation of a cult of personality has nothing to do with any behavior that leader might be doing. It's the cult of personality that's created around him, that they take a whole generation of children. Mussolini did this. They were called the Balilla. They wore little uniforms that had an M on them. You create this whole generation that grows up believing that this man is the state. This man is the country. So that's why I'm a little skeptical, not necessarily dismissive of those aspects of Hitler's life, certainly later in his life, he was using all sorts of drugs. He had probably had Parkinson's. He had tremendous gastrointestinal problems late in his life. I don't go into too much of that. There are biographies of Hitler that deal with his real sicknesses and illnesses late in life. But I don't think that any chemical or drug explains what Hitler was able to accomplish, what he did, nor is it true of any of these other four strongmen that I focus on in the book. But it's a fair question.
Be like putting like someone's name on a flag and waving it on your house or your pickup truck or something like that.
Well, the first, I always go back and look for the precedents in history and try and see how to bring this forward. Julius Caesar, of course, there's the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic was very important to the founding fathers. They believed that the Roman Republic was the great model that they should aspire to. And they knew that Julius Caesar was a dictator, which was a term that was used by the Roman Senate for a temporary military leader. Caesar marches into Rome. The Senate decides to make him dictator for 10 years. Then they make him dictator for life. And then they get worried because Caesar puts his picture on the coins in ancient Rome. And this has never been done before. The only people who had been depicted on coins before were gods. So they got nervous when Julius Caesar said, well, I'm one step away from a god. And that's what cult of personality means. And when you look at the depictions of a Mussolini, of a Hitler, Saddam Hussein certainly understood this. His picture was everywhere. His name was everywhere once he started building Iraq in his image. This cult of personality is powerful.
Yeah.
It requires unquestioned loyalty. And with some of these men, clearly, if you do question that loyalty, the price can be death.
And by the way, that makes me think of Dan McDonald is here tonight. Dan, it made me think just now what kind of brought this up. My daughters watch his kids. My older daughter watches his kids. Yesterday I went to pick them up, and Dan actually has a Caesar flag. And do you want to explain that to folks?
Well, just like any, real strong leader that I want to emulate, there are Trump flags on some people's cars. I hang a Caesar flag. I admired what he did.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, that's pretty clear. But I do have a quick question though, if I may.
Yes.
Do you think, Kenneth, by the way, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Do you think that, the modern era, as it is globally, or the U.S. in particular, it's a little less susceptible to falling to an authoritarian because of social media, right? Because of the ability for information, yes, can be controlled and manipulated a lot too, but it could also, there's more outlets for more information to get out. And you may not have, a critical mass of people succumbing to, that, just like I said, Mussolini with his name everywhere, with the emblems everywhere. Do you think now that because there are so many avenues that we are less susceptible to that?
That's a really great question. And Intelligence Squared Debates did a debate about this. Is social media good for democracy? And I can see it both ways, by the way. It's a really important question, but I think a lie travels faster than the truth, especially now on Twitter. Ken?
I think it's a fascinating question. It's a really important question, and it speaks to the fact that all of these men certainly understand that part of power is controlling information. So they all controlled the press. They all controlled the other sources of information. If you went to the movie theaters in Italy during the fascist era, you didn't see a movie until you saw a newsreel that was provided by the fascist party. So this was a form of social media before there was, social media as we understand it. I think that a lot of us believed that the coming of the computer, the personal computer, the information age was going to be part of this flowering of democracy worldwide. Unfortunately, it's a double-edged sword. And, I'm not sure really if I have a perfect answer to the question. I think it's a really great question. I tend to come down on the side that the fake news has become so dominant and is so easily manipulated by people who are very smart about how the information can be manipulated. And we are in an information age where information is power. I think it's actually more dangerous than ever before. And it's reflected in everything from, this whole vaccination story to how we talk about climate change, to how people are being told about the mailing their ballots. Everything is being held up to a degree of questioning that once upon a time, Walter Cronkite would get on the news for 15 minutes and tell us what was happening. And we understood that. But the cacophony of voices amplified with incredible sophistication of these algorithms, things that I certainly don't really understand, has changed everything. And certainly the role of Facebook in particular is very, very disturbing.
Yeah, well, at least they've banned QAnon and Twitter as well. And now the New York Post. As you
I don't know what the real answer to that is, except that I'm sort of more opposed. I'm sort of more worried about the dangers of social media than I am happy about the valuable effects. And also very clearly, and this is certainly not much less true in the United States, but it's very true in many other places, in China and Turkey and Pakistan, and go down the list, India to a degree. The state is really starting to control the internet and the social media much more strictly. So that's another place where the authoritarian, the strongman, controls power by controlling information.
And I would argue that as long as there's a relatively free internet, it cannot reach that critical mass, right? You still have 30% of the people who understand how crazy this is, right? Maybe 40% that are somewhere in between and 30% who are just, complete loyalists. But I think they can never get to that critical mass to be able to do things they want to do as long as there's a free internet, right? For now.
I hope you're right about that. Let's get to maybe one or two more questions. It's been an hour, and I want to let Ken go, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more about some of the other things that are happening in the news. But go ahead, Ken.
If I may just follow up on that for a minute. I'm going to say that I've been, watching and reading and about white supremacist groups and neo-Nazi groups for a long time before there was an internet. And once upon a time, they mimeographed pieces of paper and stuck them up on a billboard or handed them around in the neighborhood, and it was pretty, primitive and pretty grassroots. And I think that with groups like that in particular, this amplification through social media definitely makes it more dangerous, and that's why you have this, what to me is an unbelievable sight of two governors being threatened.
Ralph Northam, in case you didn't hear, they were. But I think the most important point about what you just said is not only do they used to have to print out flyers and have propaganda, and they'd hand those flyers out. And I talked with Ali Soufan about this yesterday. It aired on today's podcast. They no longer need, if you're KKK, a barn to meet in. All you need is Zoom. I mean, you can meet other people all around the country that share your insane views and your love of Caesar if you're Dan McDonald. Joe, go ahead.
Hey, everybody. You addressed this bit earlier before about the enablers around these strongmen and how they're in it for the power, and you get the military involved, and that kind of brings up the whole thing. But it just seems that today with Trump, in terms of where we are, and to use the very advanced term that Pete uses, he seems like a real big dum-dum. Are any of these strong men not as smart as the enablers around them? Or are they just like pawns that were used to perfection, only now his cult of personality seems like it's outgained what his usage is, and that they're going to be losing, you know?
It's a really interesting and good question. Let me just say that three of them right off the bat, I'm gonna say were seen that way as dumb, brutish, not very smart. Maybe four of them for sure. Mussolini was seen as this kind of preening, empty vessel, and all of these men in power, including men in the military, thought, we'll put him in power, but we'll pull the strings. We'll control things. The same thing about Hitler when he came to power. There were men in the German government, powerful men in the German government, some of them very conservative, who thought that this, they dismissed him as this colonel from Austria who had never gone to finish school and never risen very high in the ranks in the army. He wasn't a very imposing figure. We put him in. He's very good. The people like to listen to him. He's entertaining, but we'll still hold the strings. Stalin was also seen and dismissed by much more intellectuals in the Communist Party as a thuggish brute. He had really made his fame as organizing bank robberies to fund Lenin before the revolution. So he was also dismissed as a kind of thuggish brute, a dummy, if you will. Same thing with Saddam Hussein later on in Iraq. Unfortunately, all of those people who thought that they were smarter than these guys are ultimately outfoxed. Many of them end up dead. Certainly, if they don't end up dead, they end up subservient. So it's a tremendous miscalculation that people have made throughout history of presuming that because this person doesn't seem so smart, they will get the upper hand on them and be able to control them. It's a tragic miscalculation.
All right. Well, I think we have time. Well, we don't have time. I mean, I should probably let you go, right? I appreciate it.
Pete, I'm going to just say this. If guys are hanging in there and you want to talk a little bit longer, I like to talk about this stuff. So, you know, if you want to go a few more minutes, if somebody's really desperate and saying, ooh, me.
Yeah, that's Chris right there. Chris is,
there he is.
Me. Bill wants to jump back in, but let's everybody try to keep it a little bit more succinct so we can get more in here. As long as Ken doesn't have any place to be, I was actually going to go do some wind sprints. I usually run hills around this time at night, but I'll stay too. So go ahead, Chris. Yeah.
Thank you.
And Michelle, I see you waving your hands. So there's a few people, and we haven't even heard from a woman yet. So go ahead, Chris. Make it quick.
Can you hear me?
Yes, always.
Oh, good. Mr. Davis, thank you. Yeah, I sort of chatted about this on the chat really quickly. It's an obscure reference, but I was curious if you've ever read the Hitler chapter in For Your Own Good by Alice Miller.
I have not. So.
Okay, I'll be presumptuous. I'll be presumptuous and recommend it to you. But it's really interesting psychological childhood profile of Hitler. So,
all right, that's interesting. Michelle.
Yeah, sorry. This feels like I'm on with a celebrity here, Kenneth. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. The question I had is one thing I'd heard a while back about Trump specifically is that he spent a lot of time before he decided to run as a Republican analyzing who of the base of the different parties would be easier to manipulate. So I'm wondering, how much maybe there's no way of knowing this, but how much do you think that these strongmen actually believed the shtick that they were putting out there into the public, and how much did they just say all these things and feed all this back to echoing what people already believed, like you said earlier, but maybe they don't believe it at all. All they know is that they're easy to manipulate these people if they spew this stuff.
Great question.
That's a really good and interesting question. I'd say it's a little bit different for each of them in a broad case. I think that I'll just go down the list. Mussolini really didn't believe in anything. He was not an ideologue. There's no real, treatise on what fascism meant. Fascism meant we want power and we're going to take it. And fascism is what we say it is. And the power, it's not the ideology of a communism or a socialism or a democratic capitalist. He was really interested in concentrating power in his own hands. And so there was no real ideology behind Mussolini. Hitler certainly had more of an ideology, but it was really based in this belief of this German superiority. Mussolini had that to a degree, that the Italian people were once a great people and they should be returned to greatness. But it was a little more amorphous. Hitler really believed in this as in his gut, and he certainly was in his gut an anti-Semite. That wasn't a convenient thing for him. He believed that. He had learned that when he was a young man in Vienna from several people he'd heard and was influenced by. So that was truly part. And the intense resistance to communism was certainly not shtick. He really hated communism, and he was going to bring the communists down in Germany. Similarly, I should say Stalin is certainly a true believer in Marxist Leninist ideology. But once he's in power, it really becomes less about the ideology of a pure form of communism and about making the state all powerful and bringing Russia and the Soviet Union to the point of being a modern industrial superpower on par with the United States and Great Britain and others. So those are more the motivating forces for some of these guys. Mao is clearly a communist true believer in his early days and continues to be throughout. But once again, once he's in power, it becomes less about the ideology than it becomes about keeping and maintaining that power. Saddam Hussein has, kind of ideas that are all over the place ideologically. And he also is, in a way, some of these guys are gangsters at heart. And just the way a gangster wants his crew to be the most powerful crew, and they'll do anything to make sure they are. That's what is really motivating some of them. A lot of them are closer to gangsters in that sense. Think Tony Soprano without being amusing or going to a therapist to talk about things, but interested in only adding to and securing personal power. That is what motivates these men in the end, above all else.
Bill, you want to jump back in? Bill Boyle, Bill B in DC.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out something interesting about Orwell, who you discussed at the beginning, in that he was a member of POUM in Spain, who are the anarchists, fighting the fascists, where he got shot in the throat by the fascists. But when he was wounded, the POUM was suppressed by the Stalinists, and he had to flee Spain just ahead of the NKVD, who was going to probably kill him. So I think he's like the perfectly positioned to talk about all of this in his life experience.
You're absolutely right, and I tried to allude to that without getting too much into the weeds of the Spanish Civil War and all those things. But that experience made Orwell completely opposed to what he saw as Stalinist communism. He went to his death, where he died when he was around 50 years old of tuberculosis, saying that he was a democratic socialist, but he wanted nothing to do with what he saw as the ruthless totalitarianism of the Stalinist Soviet Union. But it's a completely fair and accurate point from my reading of Orwell's personal story. And that's why when he wrote Animal Farm, which is the first of the two books, precedes 1984, it was actually came out just after World War II, when Stalin was still seen as something of an ally to the British cause. And a lot of people were very, very upset that that Orwell had written what was clearly this allegory of Stalinism and been so critical of him when they still had, it was still a popular opinion of Stalin as Uncle Joe who had helped us defeat Hitler and the Nazis. And of course, as it turned out, Stalin was in many ways far more murderous than Hitler was.
Well, I have a billion more questions, but I'm going to ask anybody who wants to stay to help me tape the opening of the show with talking about some of today's news. But if anybody else has any more questions for Kenneth C Davis,
yes,
now is the time. Here. Randolph,
yes,
joining us from his ship.
My 18-wheel ship is floating well. Sir, are we going to have to wait for Donald Trump to die to get rid of him?
Kenneth actually knows the answer to this.
Are we going to have to wait for him to die to get rid of him? I have, very, very mixed feelings. I go swing from optimism to pessimism about the future of the election and the future of the country in many respects. I would like to believe that, somehow the center will hold, as a famous Yates poem about the center cannot hold. I think the center must hold eventually. And I think that American institutions are being stretched as far as they've been stretched since 1861, when they, of course, stretched to the breaking point. And this is a real testing moment for the country. In my heart, I am an optimist and will believe that the country will find a way out of this. On the other hand, there have been some really dark days, and so I don't have any kind of crystal ball. History is great for telling us what happened in the past and maybe applying it to the present, but it's not really a good way to predict the future. So on that note, I probably have to just say, can't answer.
Ladies and gentlemen, the book is Strongman, The Rise of Five Dictators and the Fall of Democracy. If you haven't bought it, please buy it now and give Mr. Davis, Professor Davis, big round of applause. I think I have a sound effect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So great.
Thank you very much for joining us for the virtual book club so that everybody could be here and ask questions. It's not exactly like being at Politics and Prose or Barnes & Noble with a whole bunch of people, but it's pretty darn close in a pandemic. So thank you so much, Ken. I love talking to you, and I love that you're in my life.
Yeah, and then someday we'll do it, and we'll have everybody in an audience together, and we'll have fun, and we'll be able to, because I do think that day will come again. So I just want to thank you for your encouragement and support over the time. And you're giving people a chance to talk like this, and not just leaving it to the talking heads on.
No, I'm so happy that people are interested, and I hear it a lot from people. We really love when Ken joins us. People love to talk about history. They realize how important it is, and the fact that so many people would show up tonight to prove that is great. So it's great. Thanks, everybody.
It is great. And look, everybody, I don't have my mask here, but I have a mask. Wear your mask, wash your hands, social distancing, and vote. I mean, that's going to be the answer. So take care, be safe, be well, and we will see our way to the end of this. Thanks a lot, Pete. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Greatly appreciate it. Good night. Thank you so much. Ken Davis, everybody. Isn't he awesome? So that was a really fun event last night, and I appreciate you being a part of it if you were, and I appreciate you subscribing to the podcast if you do, and I appreciate all of your feedback. Lately, I've been talking with a lot of listeners about several different elements of the show, how to make it better, how to make it more succinct, more informative, more enlightening, how to build a community, and I'd love to hear from you. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Great to have you in this community, to have you listening whenever you do. Thank you so much for your support in these crazy times. 20 more days, 19 more days, whatever it is, until the election. Do whatever you can. There is a ways to sign up to make sure you understand how to vote and everything, and the show links every day at the end of the show links. So check that out wherever you're listening to the podcast. And know that you're not alone. You can join us anytime on the Discord platform, on any of the other platforms that we've got for you, and always in the Zoom Hangouts. You just aren't alone if you don't want to be. So join up. And I will see you there and talk to you tomorrow when I'll have comedian Christian Finnegan and more. I love you. Goodbye.